Your people came after me and my family.
Not my people.
I'm sorry. This followed me home.
A coincidence is a conspiracy of the guilty.
You don't know the monsters.
What's this?
Nobody called it in.
Let's find out.
Monsters and what they do.
Special Ops Lioness Season 3 Episode 3 is about to break this show wide open. And if you thought Joe was already in trouble, wait until you see what the bear is infected has waiting for her. Something inside this operation has gone completely rotten, and Joe is the one who's going to be the first to find out just how deep the rot really goes. This episode is titled The Bear is Infected, and that title alone tells you everything you need to know about where this season is heading. A bear doesn't get infected from the outside. It gets infected from within. And that is exactly what Joe is about to discover about her own team. According to the official synopsis released for this episode, Joe confronts a breach, and that breach forces the entire team into a risky operation to root out the infiltrators hiding among them. Let that sink in for a second. Infiltrators. Plural. This isn't about one bad actor slipping through the cracks. This is about a network, a group of people who have already gotten deep enough into Joe's world that the only way to flush them out is through a high-risk, no-safety-net operation. And knowing how this show has built its entire season around hidden networks, foreign operatives, and personal betrayals, colliding into Joe's life, Episode 3 feels like the moment where all three of those threats stop being separate problems and start becoming one single, terrifying picture. Here's what makes this so unsettling. Joe has spent this entire season walking a razor's edge between her duty to her country and her duty to her family. She has been told again and again that unseen forces are circling her world. And now in Episode 3, those forces are no longer unseen. They are inside the room with her. Somebody on this team, somebody Joe has trusted, somebody who has access to operational details, locations, and personnel has been compromised, or worse, has been the one doing the compromising all along. Think back to what happened with the Ukrainian spy earlier this season. Joe's team got her to give up Yurimov's location, and that intel helped them close in on their target. But almost immediately after that operation, things started falling apart in ways that shouldn't have been possible. People who should have never been found were suddenly being tracked down. Families that should have been protected were suddenly being threatened. And the only explanation that makes sense is that someone inside the operation is feeding information out. Episode 3 is where Joe finally puts the pieces together, and where the audience finally gets confirmation that this isn't paranoia. This is real, and it has been happening right under Joe's nose the entire time. What's even more disturbing is how sophisticated this breach appears to be. Whoever is behind it isn't just guessing. They know exactly how these operations work. They know the protocols, the security checks, the way Joe's team moves and thinks. That is not the profile of an outside enemy stumbling onto information. That is the profile of someone who has been trained the exact same way Joe has been trained, someone who understands the CIA's playbook because they helped write it. And once you accept that possibility, the entire season starts to look different. Every conversation Joe has had, every briefing, every moment where she trusted the people around her, suddenly becomes a question mark. Now here's where this episode becomes personal in a way this show has never gone before. Because we already know from the very first episode of this season that 6 months after everything we are watching right now, Joe ends up kidnapped, taken, gone. And every single thing that happens in The Bear is Infected is building the foundation for exactly how that happens. This breach, this infiltrator storyline, it isn't a side plot. It is the origin point. Somewhere inside this episode is the answer to who is coming for Joe, and why they are able to get to her when no one is supposed to be able to touch a CIA operative like her. Let's talk about what this breach actually means for the people around Joe, because this is where things start to get personal in the most dangerous way possible. If someone inside the operation has been leaking information, then the people closest to Joe are the ones sitting directly in the blast radius, and that includes her own family. Joe has spent this entire season trying to protect her daughters while carrying the weight of a job that demands absolute secrecy. Now imagine what happens when the walls protecting that secrecy start to crack from the inside. Suddenly, the people who were never supposed to be targets become the most obvious targets of all, because attacking Joe directly is hard. She is trained, she is armed, and she is surrounded by a team built to protect her. But her family isn't. Her family is the one place where Joe has no operational advantage, And if there are infiltrators feeding information to the other side, her daughters are exactly the kind of leverage a smart enemy would go after. Think about it from the other side for a moment. If you wanted to break someone like Joe, someone who has survived combat, interrogation, and years of high-stakes fieldwork, you wouldn't come at her head-on. You would go after the one thing she can't fight her way out of, which is the safety of the people she loves. And that is exactly the kind of move this breach sets up. The infiltrators inside Joe's world don't need to know where Joe is at every moment. They just need to know where her family is, and once that information gets out, the entire structure of protection Joe has built for her daughter starts to fall apart in ways she may not even realize until it's too late. This is also why the timing of this episode matters so much. Remember, everything happening right now in Joe's world is taking place 6 months before the moment we already know is coming, the moment where Joe herself ends up taken. That means whatever breach is exposed and the bear is infected isn't just a standalone crisis for this episode. It is the crack that eventually splits wide open into the exact situation Joe finds herself in later. Every name that gets exposed, every piece of intel that leaks, every trust that gets broken here is a domino, and somewhere down that line of dominoes is Joe, alone, without her team, without backup, in the exact position her enemies have been engineering the entire time. And here's the part that should genuinely worry longtime fans of this show. Joe is not someone who waits around for permission. If she suspects, even for a second, that her family is in danger because of a breach inside her own operation, she is not going to follow protocol. She is not going to wait for a green light from the agency. She is going to act, and she is going to act fast, because that is who Joe has always been. That instinct to move before thinking, to protect first and process the consequences later, is exactly the kind of behavior that gets operatives killed, or in this case, potentially gets them captured. If Joe pushes forward into this operation to root out the infiltrators without waiting for the full picture, she could be walking directly into the trap the other side has been setting up, a trap specifically designed to isolate her from her team at the worst possible moment. There's also something deeply unsettling about how calculated this breach appears to be. This isn't sloppy. This isn't a random leak. Someone has been patient, someone has been careful, and someone has had access for long enough to understand exactly how to exploit it without raising suspicion until now. That level of patience tells you this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment betrayal. This was planned, possibly for months, which means whoever is behind it has been sitting inside Joe's trusted circle the entire time, watching, waiting, and feeding information out piece by piece until the moment was right to make their move. And if that's true, then the real question isn't just who the infiltrator is. It's how long they've actually been there, and how much damage has already been done before Joe even realizes what's happening. The scariest part of all of this is what it does to Joe's ability to trust anyone around her. Once you know there's a leak, you can't unknow it. Every teammate, every briefing, every piece of intel suddenly comes with a shadow of doubt attached to it. And for someone in Joe's position, that kind of paranoia isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. Hesitation in the field gets people killed. If Joe starts second-guessing the people she's supposed to rely on in high-pressure moments, that split-second delay could be exactly what the other side is counting on. This episode isn't just about catching an infiltrator. It's about watching the foundation of trust that Joe's entire world is built on start to collapse in real time. And once that foundation cracks, everything that follows for the rest of this season becomes exponentially more dangerous. Now let's bring this all together, because everything happening in The Bear is Infected is building toward one devastating conclusion that ties directly into the moment we already know is coming. 6 months from now, Joe is taken, kidnapped, ripped away from her team, her family, and everything she has spent her entire life fighting to protect. And the breach exposed in this episode is not a separate story. It is the first domino. Once infiltrators are confirmed to be operating inside Joe's world, the countdown to her capture effectively begins, because every piece of information that has already leaked, every name, every location, every operational detail, is now sitting in the hands of people who know exactly how to use it against her. Here's what makes this so gut-wrenching to sit with. Joe is not someone who is careless. She is not someone who misses warning signs. She has survived situations that would break most people, and she has done it by staying sharp, staying alert, and trusting her instincts. But even the sharpest operative in the world cannot fight an enemy she cannot see. That is the horrifying reality this episode sets up. Joe isn't walking into danger because she made a mistake. She is walking into danger because the people closest to her, The people she was trained to trust with her life may be the very ones who opened the door for her enemies to walk through. And this is where the emotional weight of this episode really hits. Because underneath all the tradecraft, the breaches, the infiltrators, and the high-stakes operations, this is still a story about a mother trying to protect her family while the walls around her quietly close in. Jo has spent this entire season trying to hold two lives together, the life of a CIA operative and the life of a wife and mother. And this episode is the moment where those two lives collide in the worst possible way. If the infiltrators inside her operation are willing to go after the people closest to her to get to her, then Jo is no longer just fighting a war overseas. She is fighting a war that has followed her home, into the one place she believed her family was safe. Think about what it must feel like to realize that the danger isn't coming from some far-off enemy anymore. It's coming from inside the walls you built to keep everyone safe. That kind of betrayal doesn't just threaten a mission. It threatens everything Jo believes about the people around her, and it forces her into a position where she has to decide how far she is willing to go to protect her family, even if that means breaking every rule she has ever followed. And knowing Jo, knowing how this character has been written from the very beginning of this show, she is not going to sit back and let the agency handle this on its own timeline. She is going to move, and she is going to move in a way that puts her directly in the path of whatever is coming for her 6 months down the line. This is exactly why The Bear is Infected feels like the true turning point of this entire season. It's not just another mission. It's the moment where the threat stops being theoretical and starts being personal, immediate, and impossible to ignore. Every episode after this one is going to carry the weight of what gets uncovered here. And every decision Jo makes from this point forward is going to be shaped by the knowledge that she can no longer fully trust the people standing beside her. That is a terrifying place for any operative to be in, but for a mother trying to protect her children while carrying that same burden, it becomes something far heavier, something that goes beyond duty and straight into raw, desperate survival.